Thank you very much. I think I'll open it up to the public. If anyone would like to come and make a comment or question, come to the microphone. Please give your name and your address.
My name is Dr. Lynn Siebert, 178 Hillcrest Avenue. I just have a couple of questions, and one of them is, I noticed that you referred to the consistency with the state plan and the classification under the state plan, the 2001 state plan. Wasn't there a 2011 state plan?
It was a draft, but there was never an adoption of a state plan after 2001.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Also, my question, is there any sense of where the athletic fields are likely to be moved on the site?
They are likely to be moved basically to the other side of the Colgate property, closer to the Bennett Arena.
And would those be within the residential area versus the commercial area?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, my other question has to do with the density. You referred to 5 units per acre for the residential area.
6.
I'm sorry, 6.
Yes.
Yes. And I was anticipating my own question as to why not 5. I know in many years past, before your time here, it was 5 units to the acre, typically from Mount Laurel and affordable housing, builder's remedy densities, and I was wondering why 6 was being suggested.
Well, there's a number of reasons. I think that, number one, the municipality has a series of existing townhouse districts with varying densities. There's a TH4, a TH6, a TH8, some of which have affordable housing set-aside requirements. I think this is right in the middle. I think that to basically realistically ask a redeveloper to provide a 20% set-aside, which is what is in this plan and what a developer would be required to do. I think the density of 6 is the appropriate density. In fact, it's the minimum presumptive density under code rules, the second round rules, which are the only rules that haven't been invalidated for a 20% set-aside. So going any lower, I think, would basically be sort of pushing a limit, if you would. And just as by way of example, if you recall on the Honeywell site, and I know you had appeared in some of the Honeywell meetings, that is a 4 unit per acre townhouse density on Honeywell, and they basically had a 10% set-aside. So the set-aside is related to the density per se, and I think with a 20% set-aside, anything less than 6 would not be a reasonable figure in terms of providing the opportunity to provide that internal subsidy between the market rate and the affordable units.
And you say under the code rules now, it's more or less the minimum.
The minimum presumptive with a 20% set
For a
aside.
20% set
Correct.
aside. Okay, all right. The parking question, is there an anticipation or a requirement or suggested requirement under the redevelopment rules for parking to be open parking, like obviously for the residential units, I assume that they'll be next to those, but for the commercial, you're not going to have a garage per se, are you?
The plan does not expressly provide for parking garages. There's just simply parking standards. But I don't believe, based on the amount of land area for retail commercial and the size and type that could fit within that land area, that, and knowing what the cost of garage spaces are, I would doubt very much that you're going to see structured parking on the commercial component.
I mean, I would hate to think that.
I don't think you're going to see it
Put in
as a
giant-
practical matter.
Right. Okay, all right. I guess, and my other questions really I was happy to hear about the D variance, and that would mean people would have to come back to the township committee.
That's absolutely correct.
And not just go to the planning board or
To
to
the
the
zoning
zoning
board.
board.
Correct.
Right, okay. And my other question has to do, speaking of zoning, with the OSGU modification. Now, am I correct in saying that you did, in fact, redefine slightly the OSGU designation, or was it just sort of put aside and this is a new zone?
So what, essentially what happened is both from a master plan level and a zoning level, the Colgate property, believe it or not, was split zoned between I-21 and OSGU. And what this document does is it supersedes the zoning. So essentially, this is now ultimately the de facto zoning that is in place for the property per se.
And what is that? Is that the...
It's the mixed retail, commercial, residential, open space. This becomes the de facto zoning, the redevelopment plan.
So
There's 25 pages.
it's not officially then OSGU.
It's no longer OSGU I-21. It's gone. It's basically gone. This basically eliminates that designation.
And it's very specific only to the site, it's not establishing...
That's absolutely correct. It's only on the 49 acres for Colgate, nothing else.
Okay, I guess the concern that I've been hearing around is that OSGU is somehow being redefined and that it would be setting a precedent.
That came up at the planning board also, that question, when we presented the master plan amendment Monday night, and I assured the questioner that the only change in OSGU from the land use classification master plan related to the Colgate property and only the Colgate property.
Okay, all right. I think that's all that I had questions about. Do you know, one last thing, do you have any sense, there's been so much turmoil on the COA issue, has there been any further definition or guidance as to what the township may have?
How much time does everybody have?
I want to get the crystal ball.
I'll try and keep it brief. It's very complicated. It's still in the courts. Different things are happening in the different court vicinages. Some are being more progressive, others are sort of taking their time. The major issue that is unresolved is what is the number, what is the obligation? And that is being fought out right now in the courts. And the dilemma that the municipalities have is, how do you prepare a plan when you don't know what your number is? And not just Morris Township, but many municipalities throughout the state are grappling with that very dilemma.
I understood that since 1970. Been around and watched it for a long time. Okay, all right, well, thank you, appreciate
You're
your
welcome.
answers.
Thanks, Doug.
My name's Dale Porter. I live at 17 Mark Twain, Morris Township. I'm wondering if this project will improve the traffic flow somehow at the Speedwell Hanover intersection. The last time I looked up the county things, they said they were going to redevelop that intersection and make it double left turns and things. All along Hanover, clear to Agway now, traffic has cleared up, you know, I would say 100%. I don't think anybody's got any complaints about that. But now, every night still, you can't get across, Speedwell Avenue. So I was thinking, you know, are we waiting for, who are those guys, BJ's Warehouse to come in and do a little lane widening there
Yes.
to help pay for the intersection at Speedwell, or is that gone? Or?
So two things. One is that, and I'm not familiar with all the intimate details of the BJ's application, but it's my understanding that there were improvements that were required as part of that approval. And certainly if and when a redeveloper comes in for site plan on the Colgate site, that developer is going to have to go to the planning board and is going to have to, as part of the application, prepare traffic studies to basically assess the traffic impact of this project. And at that point, all the improvements that have been done or will be done in connection with the development that has occurred in Hanover will be taken into account, as well as whatever improvements may be necessary because of this particular project. And I will just add that we did a master plan Monday night, and in that master plan, we outlined several key intersections that would be considered for study during the Colgate site plan proceedings, and one of them that we noted was Hanover and Speedwell. So presumably the planning board will retain its own traffic consultant at that time. It's done it in the past with major projects, to review the work done by the applicant to make sure that whatever's presented is accurate and that that traffic engineer represents the best interests of the planning board in Morris Township. You're welcome.
Hi, good evening. Kathy Wilson, 20 Beechwood Drive. I have a few questions. Some of them have already been asked. I had a few questions about the affordable housing. And one basic question I have is there a legal definition or like, what is affordable housing? What is the standard that defines what that means?
It's low and moderate income housing based on the median income for the region of which Morris Township is a part. And don't ask me how they came up with these regions. The code determined that you're part of a 4-county region, and they publish those figures. And low is equal to 50% of the median, and moderate is equal to 80% of the median. And then there are calculators that are in place that makes a determination based on not spending more than 30% of your income on housing as to what is affordable to those groups. And then there's weighting in terms of weighting the various households. It gets complicated, but suffice it to say that affordable rents and or sales prices are set based on those percentages of the median, and that's as much as the developer can charge for those units to maintain them as being affordable, and they will be deed restricted for 30 years so that they remain affordable.
I see. So there's a limit to the cost that can be charged?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Is there an estimate of, or is there a range, or how does that, the calculation for how it's determined is complex, but is there a range for what it is?
Yeah, you actually calculate it. There's something called a COA cost calculator, and you just plug in numbers, and it will basically tell you for your region and the median income in the region, based on the 30% that can be spent on housing and the 50 and 80% low to mod, what a developer can charge in terms of rents and or sales prices. And they are below, obviously, market sales prices and or market rents. But the developer has to maintain those rents.
All right. And then for this site, per the plan, 60% approximately of the site is devoted toward residential?
Yeah, it's roughly 40% retail, commercial, 60% residential. We give a little swing and range of flexibility. I think we're 35 to 45 commercial and 55 to 65 residential. So if you take the averages, it's 40-60.
Okay, all right. And the affordable housing is a separate building, right? And it's purely rental.
Yeah, and let me explain that. The township has to satisfy an affordable housing obligation that, and again, even though we don't know what our number is yet, that goes beyond just this site. But what we do know is that as a requirement of that obligation, a certain percentage of the units that are part of the plan have to be rental. So, and we also have the opportunity to get bonus credits for rental, 2-for-1 bonus credits. So understanding that this is a numbers game, it's basically in the township's interest to do rental housing up to the required amount that it must do to comply with the COA requirements. So that is why we are seeking that there be a separate rental ability. And the group home, which is just 6 units, that also can apply towards the rental portion of the obligation, and also is eligible for credit. So this plan, the way it's structured, the township gets sort of the biggest bang for the buck on COA credits.
So on the group home, I had a few questions about that also. Who actually owns the building? Is that the organization or the developer?
Well, the plan doesn't preclude either, and ultimately it's usually a nonprofit that will operate it, and the developer will work with a nonprofit. Sometimes the developer will own the ground. There are various different iterations, but the supportive housing that I'm familiar with, it's basically operated by groups that specialize in providing either units or beds of various forms of supportive housing.
I see. I had the experience myself one time of living right next door to a group home, and it was a wonderful experience. But the biggest problem was parking. So are there provisions for parking that are specific to a group home?
Yeah, it depends on the ultimate end users at the group home. In some cases, with supportive housing, the residents drive. In some cases, they don't drive, and I think that all has to be worked out. But suffice it to say that depending upon who the operator is and what the characteristics of the resident base are, that the planning board will, fully be cognizant and make sure that there's adequate parking for whomever the end user is going to be.
So that's part of the site plan?
Yes, correct.
Okay, all right. Are there any preliminary estimates on the number of kids this will add to the school system?
I have not done any estimates of school children as part of the work that I've done for the governing body and the planning board. Part of that gets a little difficult, and it's complicated to do that. The problem being that the one published study that's out there is now 18 years old, and it overestimates the amount of school children based on recent trends. So, but I've not done that as part of the work that I've done today.
All right, just curious. Is there any timeline on when the next steps, the site plan, people can expect the developer's plan to be ready to go to a site plan and that?
Well, I think that ultimately, if the township committee adopts this plan, typically the next step, and I'm not involved in this, but typically in my experience, the next step is that there's typically a redeveloper designated, and then there's a redevelopment agreement that's put in place, and then ultimately the redeveloper would basically prepare and file plans consistent with the requirements of this redevelopment plan.
It was my understanding from attending the two previous meetings that the developer is already selected and has worked with you guys on the plan. Is
Well,
that right?
and anyone up there can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a developer who has an agreement with Colgate as the purchaser of Colgate, but and yes, there's been meetings with the prospective redeveloper that I've attended, but the township has not taken formal action yet to designate that developer as the redeveloper of the site. That would be a next step in the future. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, so, all right, I kind of assumed that this person in the resolution or the developer there was, but maybe I'm making a wrong assumption.
Well, I don't think you're making a wrong assumption, because there is a redeveloper who that we have sat down with and worked with in anticipation of this plan moving forward. And that redeveloper has an agreement with Colgate to redevelop the property, which is why we were working with that particular redeveloper. But again, if all goes well, and I think it's anticipated that if that developer, if the township moves forward with that developer, they will have to take formal action in terms of a redevelopment agreement. But that's not been done to date.
The potential party is a contract purchaser,
Correct.
so
Yeah.
it would logically follow.
It would logically follow.
Okay, that's what I assumed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. We
Thank
appreciate
you,
your time.
Mr. Mayor.
Seeing no further members of the public, can I take a motion to close the public portion?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Mr. Mills, you can roll call vote.
Get a roll call.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Mancuso?
Yes.
Mr. Nunn?
Yes.
Mayor Sister?
Yes. I, Bruce D. Sisler, Mayor, declare the ordinance adopted and finally passed, approve the same, and direct that the clerk publish proper notice thereof in the newspaper and to record the ordinance in the proper place. At this point in time, I will open it up again. If anyone has public comment or inquiry, please come to the microphone. Please give me your name and your address. Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to close the public portion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Matters received for the record.
And circulated?
And I will take a motion for adjournment.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?